Welcome to The Art of Aging. I'm your host, Sherry Gibson Walters, Certified Professional Consultant on Aging and CEO of Harmony Caregiving. Today we're diving deep into a conversation that touches the heart of what it means to live well by talking about death. We're joined by Rayne Johnson, a compassionate and experienced death doula and founder of Doing Death Care Differently. Rayne supports individuals and families through the end-of-life journey, bringing presence, grace, and wisdom into some of the most emotional moments a family has to face. We've spoken with Rayne before, but today we're going further. Today we're going to be exploring what death can teach us about life, how families navigate difficult decisions, and the powerful movement of death cafes. Rayne, it's always a pleasure to have you here with us. I mean that. You just bring so much wisdom. So really excited to dive in here and welcome back.
Thank you.
So Rayne, you have spent a lot of time working with people who are at end of life. What comes to their minds in their last hours or days of their lives?
Well, it's pretty varied. I mean, I think what comes to my mind immediately is people's desire to know, like if their religion, how they were brought up, what religion and spirituality, it's often takes forefront, even if they haven't been very religious in the past. But something comes up for them that they become a lot more curious. Like one friend who I helped at the end of her life, she regretted that she hadn't studied more.
Interesting.
And she was I found herself very spiritual. Not necessarily religious, but more spiritual. So that's what comes to mind. I think that if there are regrets in terms of relationships, then encouraging them to have the conversations with their families or friends or whatever, ahead of time to be able to do that. Forgiveness and what other exercises they feel that they need to do to clear themselves.
Making it an easier journey for them, right? A lot of the times, like they always say that when you forgive somebody, you're not doing it for that person, you're doing it for yourself. But when you're on your deathbed, it's probably a different story too, because you're then, when you talk about people going into the religion and the curiosity and, geez, what's going to happen to me when I die and things like that, then I think that does bring to mind, you kind of go to your old teachings and you go, wow, was I a good person to this? Like, I want to make amends because maybe I didn't show up the way I wish I would have, or I should have.
No, it's true.
Yeah. So I think the one thing too, you talked about regrets. Are there any reflections that you can think of? One of the things that I've heard more often than not is that people do have this thought of, I wish I would have spent more time with family. Like family seems to be a really big piece of the puzzle for them when they're thinking about what they missed, or and that comes to me as like a regret. It's like I should have been there, but no other way, right? When you're in those, walking those steps. So.
Well, it's interesting about regrets because I was having a conversation with this doctor, an MD, a while back, and he said, hopefully people do have regrets. Okay, so this is a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we do have regrets because that means, have we not lived a life well,
If you have regrets, you have not lived a life well.
No, it shows that we have lived a life.
If you have regrets.
Fully. Well, it could be. So it's like just leaning into what we're faced with at the end of life.
Yeah. That's
actually, it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
So let's do away with the perfection piece.
Yeah.
And lean into what, if there's regrets, and there's regrets.
And then look maybe at what were the gifts in your lifetime. And look at those gifts and look at those experiences.
Right. They can always come back to that.
Yeah. And some people don't always find resolution at the end anyways. There's family members that don't want to make amends. They don't want to make amends, and so they just die with whatever.
Yeah.
Do you ever find that you've worked with families where, let's say, the person that's dying is actually thinking, or the family members that are around the person that's dying know that there's something really deep that they wish that the loved one would actually come to terms with, but that loved one still chooses to carry something really big or really heavy with them?
Yeah, there's not one specific scenario that comes to mind on that, but I know that there are cases that I've dealt with. And again, they go to the grave with that.
Yeah, and it's just the choice they make, right? And or not. It's like the family makes it for them, the people make it for them. But really, I think one of the biggest things you can see too from the whole idea of what people regret and what people think about, having worked with so many people, how has it changed your perspective on living, on life?
Right. I think that each day I try to live as fully as possible. And even, say if I'm dealing with someone else's death, that again, to be able to face it fully can help lighten my own life up. It doesn't drag it down like most people might think it does.
Yeah, it's how you process that. I think we shared a story last time where you're teaching your grandchildren or grandkids or grandnephews, how to face death, right? At a young age. And
right.
So basically this kind of allows them to do that. This allows them to do that, but working with people, it allows you to kind of see more, instinctively, like feel more. Potentially.
Well, and I think supporting the family it's a big part of what I do. So even like in the last few weeks, I've been supporting a grandniece and with her grandmother who is actively dying right now. And so yesterday I just sent a text saying, have you thought of reading to your grandma? Finding out if there's any spiritual scripture that she likes or any poem or any book that she loved.
Yeah.
And consider reading to her and having that time. And whether she's sleeping or not, it doesn't matter. And so, I got a text back saying, I was thinking about that. So maybe, what I suggested just gave her that little...
I should do that.
It's like, okay, that's okay to do.
Yeah.
If people need permission often because their instinct, just like what I alluded to last time, it's like people know how to die if we let them have that space. And I think people know how to caregive if they are allowed to have that kind of space to know that they are going to do okay.
In the caregiving role. Like whatever they do, it's right and perfect. And if the person doesn't like it, they'll just tell you.
Right. Or the person will instinctively figure it's like, okay, that didn't work.
Yeah. And I know that caregivers can carry a lot of burdens with the role of caregiving often comes like, not that it's a burden, but it's a heaviness, right? So what types of things do you, who's constantly working around different families, different conflicts, different situations and scenarios, like how do you actually protect yourself being in the role that you're in as a death doula from that kind of pull? Like you actually said it lightens you up, so it doesn't, but are there times where you feel like exhausted by it?
So at times, especially if I've had a personal loss and I don't give enough space in between looking at and then going to clients, I would say that in working, in such an emotional area, it's important to know the difference between empathy, compassion, and sympathy. So sympathy is an old term. It's an old word. Like if you were to look it up in the dictionary, it's pretty old, and it really is kind of looking down on a person if you sympathize. Oh, poor them.
Yes, yeah.
It's like, so we're looking down. Empathy is something that we can't have compassion without having empathy. And empathy is really important to understand one's boundaries, especially as a caregiver.
Yes, yeah, right? Absolutely. I see where you're coming from.
Because if you're very empathetic, chances are you might carry on that person's grief or that person's trauma, and you don't know how to create the boundaries. So it's studying or learning more about how to deepen one's compassion.
Right.
That carries the empathy with it, but then you don't have to carry their
stuff or the trauma and the grief.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's important. Like I do a lot of work around grief, or have in the past. I do there's practices that I do to deepen my grief, or to deepen my grief. Yeah, deepen my grief. That too. I know how to do that. Yeah. To deepen my compassion, and then understanding the different kinds of compassion.
Right. Tell me more.
Okay, so a nurse could have great compassion, but they could also be heavy-handed compassion.
Okay.
So they could walk into a room and say, okay, we got to get this done now. Mabel, you got to take your pills, or, so it's very heavy-handed.
Right. Because they know what's best for you.
Right.
Because they've known what's best for every other person
Exactly.
before they walked in the room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's so many different kinds of compassion, which is fascinating. And we can get into that another time. But I love teaching about the different kinds because, there's also credential kind of compassion. So, being a caregiver, I think for myself, I've been prone to this. It's like, I'm pretty good. I'm a caregiver. I get some brownie points, kind of thing, you know, and it's hard to admit, but it's sort of like that credential kind of compassion that
never heard that term
one might carry, So, and then there's the other thing with compassion too is it's infinite. We can't have compassionate burnout, like you often hear. I think it's called compassion.
They do call it. They call it compassionate. They do. They call it compassion fatigue.
Yes, thank you.
Compassion fatigue.
I mean, there is such a thing, yes, but in some sense. But if you look at our hearts, we have an infinite way of being in our heart, in our compassion. Mm-hmm. It's endless.
Yeah. So where's the fatigue come from?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. I think fatigue is coming from carrying too much, not knowing when to set down, your work bag at the door before going into the house, or setting, clearing each death. So I think I mentioned this before in the last podcast. It's like if I remember to light a candle or burn some incense or sage or whatever when I get home after a death, then that helps me honor my relationship with that person and the family. And it creates, the ritual that allows me to give me space to say, okay, I did all the best I could, all that I could. I did the best I could in this care. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's normally after the death. The other thing too about compassion fatigue or self-care, if I don't catch myself, if I have say an intense client or family, and I might take it to bed with me. So in terms, I get in bed and I'm just ruminating. I'm thinking about where the person's at, how they're doing, continuously. And if I don't catch myself in doing that, then chances are it's going to affect my sleep. It's going to affect, I'm not getting the best rest I can. My immune system is probably going to be on edge. So it takes a lot of effort to catch it.
Yeah, I think it would, for sure.
Because I get so committed, right?
Yeah.
Like you're very committed to your people.
Yeah, and I think the thing is you want to shut it off or leave the work case at the door, but that's that boundary that you're talking about, whether it's a physical boundary or an emotional boundary with the family or the person that's dying, but it's actually that boundary for yourself, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's like you have to be able to say, I'm not working past this time.
Right.
I mean, in what you do, you're up you are on the clock 24 hours,
right?
7 days,
and
right?
like we were talking before, palliative doctors could be on call for 24 hours. So how do you, turn it off but not turn it off?
Yeah.
While your phone is still open.
Yeah.
Well, it takes practice, and again, I think a good spiritual practice, a good meditation, or some form of prayer, of some form of active guided meditations.
Mm-hmm. And it really takes 5 minutes to do.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Or
if one has practice.
One of the biggest things that I've just been talking about with a few ladies that I know is the whole deep breath work. So even a simple thing like taking a deep breath in, like you do yoga and this practice, right? But it doesn't have to be somebody that does yoga to do it. It can completely reset your body with one deep breath in and one deep breath out. Right?
Exactly.
And then do a couple of them. And then it kind of resets. But I mean, having said that, people that are on the clock for 24/7, like the palliative care doctors, some of them that are out there are on the clock 24/7. Or when you have a home care agency, you have 24/7 lines to answer. So somebody is always up and watching, right? And I do think it's important to make sure that we're mindful of that as well. So that even though I think there's the compassion fatigue probably happens more with, I don't want to say families, but more when you're working within a family. So like a mother to a a daughter to a mother, or a son to a mother, or something like that, because you're already emotionally tied. You're already familiar. And I think that just kind of sometimes comes with that. And also there's the expectations of that person on that person that's caregiving. So I actually think family members can sometimes be very draining on the people that are actually caring for them. Like there's a high expectation of how that person's being taken care of.
You definitely have to share the care.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. You have to share the care.
You have to share the care, and people need to be reminded, because some people, members of the family, might be really good at creating their boundaries,
and others
not
don't. So good, yeah.
They don't know how to take time off.
Yeah,
like when my mother was dying, it was very hard to leave her room. I would make myself go for a walk, because we can't control the outcome. One thing I did want to say too about self-care, that's sort of an overused term, but there's a nurse that started this whole thing called the pause.
Okay.
So after each death, like so whether it be in a ER or in a hospital room, in a hospice, or if I was working with a client and I happened to be in the room after someone died, to have a pause. Let the pause be, so within even that pause, doesn't even have to be a certain specific length of time, but even saying that term, don't you feel like there's a lot more expansiveness, there's a lot more space, and there's a lot of honoring. So we're honoring the life that happened. We're honoring the end of that life.
That's very beautiful.
And I think that, it is, and it's there's, people would have a sigh of relief,
Yeah, it's kind of like what comes to mind for me in that is how they talk about music, and how sometimes it's that silence in the middle of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's that silence that actually makes the song so much more powerful, because you have this. And it's just like the note, or the note just lingers, and then there's like a silence, right? And it makes it so much more powerful.
There's a space.
It's a sacredness. It's like a sacred pause.
Right. And come to think of it, certain deaths lead up to it really quite beautifully, although it's very hard. So at the end of life, there's been, some people will have the breath in, and then they won't breathe, and family thinks, oh, they've died, there's not the breath out, and there's quite a space.
Right.
And so we don't get into our head about it, then it's like, and then the person breathes out. Or in. They'd be breathing in.
Yeah.
So then there's this relax. But I think, and that can happen. That can go on for quite a while. And I think if families know, or caregivers know that, then those spaces in between those breaths are so precious.
Yeah, it's like you got another moment.
Right. And it's leading up to the silence that happens after that last breath. You've heard that we come in with an in-breath and we go out with the out-breath.
Yeah. Very, very nice to think of that way. And it just actually, it's sort of like, it's almost like you're that preemptive grief piece. You're actually anticipatory grief, I think they call it, right? So in this moment, it's like you're actually thinking that's going to be the last moment, but then you do actually get a couple more of those moments in. Right,
and lean, like I do love that term, leaning into when someone is dying, or leaning into even the suffering, leaning into the relief that's felt. So we're not turning away, because anytime we turn away and think, okay, this is too much, then it's like we're really not appreciating that life fully, if that makes sense. And come back to that silence. After my mother died, profound silence I felt. And my two sisters were there, and I mentioned it, and my younger sister felt the same, that there was this profound silence. And even to this day, a year and a half later, it can happen immediately. And I think that it must happen to more people. But it's hard to realize, because we get caught up in the emotional piece of after someone dies.
Right.
That these kinds of special moments can be passed over, because it's like, oh, that's just like that's nonsense. Well, or we got to now call the funeral home. Let's get busy and
get it done. Get all the tasks checked off the list. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the profound silence.
Yeah.
And making sure people pause for that. That could be a really good message.
I think so. I mean, just so that it doesn't turn into that, turning grief into doing rather than being.
That's good. That's good, Rayne. So, Rayne, thank you so much for being part of our podcast again. This has been a very meaningful conversation. Your insight and compassion actually always offer us such wisdom. I always say that. And to our listeners, if ever you felt afraid to talk about death or you're unsure how to support a loved one, we encourage you to reach out to Harmony Caregiving. There is always peace to be found in open, honest conversations. And we invite you to attend the Death Cafe that Harmony Caregiving will host with the assistance of Rayne, helping us to facilitate our first of many cafes. And remember, whether you're navigating these decisions for yourself or for someone that you love, you're not alone. There is peace to be found in open conversations, and we will have those with you at any time. So take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you for tuning in to The Art of Aging. Doing death care differently with Rayne Johnson, Death Doula, and Harmony Caregiving, a home care agency here in Edmonton, Alberta. Carpe diem, seize the day.